I'm tired of my wife's excuses for being late. When our daycare bill reached $262, I decided enough was enough. I am 34 years old. My wife is 33 years old. We've been together for 10 years and have a 4-year-old son together. Ever since we started dating, my wife has chronically been late. I can count on one hand how many times I remember her being on time. She has this bizarre tendency to leave when we're supposed to be arriving at whatever venue we're going to. If we have reservations for 7 now, she's not ready until 7 now. If the movie starts at 5:45, she's not ready until 5:45. I used to find it kind of humorous and almost endearing. There was an ongoing joke of her being from the distant future, where we had figured out wormhole technology for instant teleportation, and that she just had not adapted to the present year yet. But now that we have a child together and important appointments for which we cannot be late, it's not funny anymore. It regularly causes me a significant amount of stress. Our son started going to daycare last year. Since my wife is a SAHM, taking him to and from daycare is her responsibility. Naturally, she is late dropping him off every day. Then, she is late picking him up. In the middle of August, our son's daycare sent out a group email informing us that there would be a new fee for any late pickups. Every minute that a parent was late, the daycare would tack on a $2 fee. 10 minutes late would incur a $20 fee. To be perfectly honest, there's no doubt in my mind that they started this because of my wife, who was late to pick him up literally every day his first year. I've tried to get her to be better, but when confronted, she always has an excuse ready to go, which makes it impossible to have any discussion about the subject. Well, our bill for the first 2 weeks of September just arrived. Lo and behold, on top of the normal fee, I found a $262 late pickup fee on the bill, which means that my wife was late to pick him up, on average, 12 minutes per day. I told my wife that as usual, I would be paying for the normal fees, but she would have to pay the $262 late pickup fee out of her $800 allowance. She initially refused, saying she couldn't afford it, despite having no real expenses other than her phone and Netflix. And then she called the daycare to try and debate the issue. I watched as she tried to play Erin Brockovich. She eventually tired herself out frantically Googling laws while on the phone and hung up on the poor staff. At that time, I told her that it was entirely her fault, and that if she can't even do the bare minimum of being an adult, she needs to grow up. She immediately began barraging me with excuses. She then laid down her final debate-ending question. Why don't you just pick him up then? Because I'm at work. I work for a living. Anyway, the daycare won't take him back until the bill is paid in full. I feel terrible for my son because he's completely innocent in all of this and loves going to daycare, but I feel like it's the only way to get my wife to realize there are consequences for her tardiness. Am I pushing it too far too fast, or should I stick to my guns here? Update 1. A lot has happened since my last post, and I figured it was time for a detailed update. I didn't realize how much support and advice I'd get from this community, and I really appreciate all of you taking the time to respond. I've read every comment, and a lot of what you've said has stuck with me. So, after I posted, things didn't exactly calm down. In fact, it's almost like my wife doubled down on her behavior. I thought maybe after our argument about the late fees and her needing to pay them, she would start taking it more seriously, but that didn't happen. For a couple of days, she seemed to be making an effort. She dropped our son off at daycare on time, and when she picked him up, she was only a couple of minutes late, which, for her, felt like a small victory. But by the third day, things were back to normal. Well, her normal anyway. She was late dropping him off and picking him up, and it was like everything we'd talked about didn't matter. I could feel my frustration building, but I didn't want to explode. Instead, I tried to talk to her again, calmly this time. I told her that her tardiness was affecting more than just me. Our son was noticing. The daycare staff were frustrated, and I was stressed every day, waiting for another bill filled with late fees. But as usual, she had excuses ready. Traffic was bad, or I lost track of time, or he was fussy, and it took me longer to get him out the door. I understand that sometimes things happen, but this was every single day. It wasn't a random occurrence anymore. It was a pattern. One day, after another late pickup, our son came home visibly upset. He didn't have the words to express why, but he was cranky, and it was clear something was bothering him. Later, I found out from one of the daycare teachers that the other kids had started noticing he was always the last one to leave. They hadn't said anything mean to him yet, but kids are perceptive. I could tell that he was starting to feel left out, and that broke my heart. I tried to tell my wife about it, thinking that maybe hearing how this was affecting our son would help her realize the seriousness of the situation. But her response was dismissive, almost as if she didn't believe it was a big deal. The thing is, I get that being a stay-at-home mom is hard. I've never tried to downplay how difficult her job is. Taking care of a 4-year-old full-time is exhausting, and I know that managing the house on top of that is no small feat. But being late, consistently, to the point where it's affecting our son's emotional well-being, is not something I can just brush off. I felt like I was at a breaking point, but I didn't know what to do. How do you make someone see that their actions are affecting the people around them when they refuse to acknowledge it? Then came the breaking point. We got another bill from the daycare, and this one was even higher than before. The late fees had ballooned to $320. I sat down with the bill in front of her, and we had another argument. I told her, again, that I wasn't going to pay the late fees. It wasn't fair to me or to our son, and she needed to take responsibility for her actions. She fired back with the same line, "Why don't you just pick him up if it's such a big deal?" I was so frustrated that I could barely respond. I'm at work. I can't just drop everything to pick him up on time every day. I've explained this to her over and over, but it's like she doesn't hear me. Finally, I said something I never thought I'd say. I told her that if she couldn't handle being responsible for picking up and dropping off our son, maybe we needed to look into other options. I suggested we look into hiring someone to help, or, if things didn't improve, that I might have to cut back on my work hours to make sure he was taken care of. She didn't like that at all. She said I was overreacting and that I was trying to take control of everything, making her feel like she wasn't good enough. That's not what I was trying to do at all, but I could see how she might feel that way. After that argument, things were tense for a while. We weren't really talking, and I was feeling more disconnected from her than ever. I love my wife, and I don't want this issue to come between us. But at the same time, I can't keep pretending like this isn't a problem. I started thinking about whether we should go to therapy, not just for her lateness, but for everything. It feels like this issue is a symptom of something deeper, but I don't know what that is yet. Then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, my boss pulled me into his office. I was nervous because I didn't know what it was about, but it turns out he had noticed I was distracted at work. He asked me if everything was okay at home. I'm not the type to bring personal issues into work, but I guess I hadn't been doing a great job of hiding my stress. I ended up telling him a bit about what was going on, not everything, but enough for him to understand why I was struggling. He listened, and then he surprised me by offering a temporary solution. He said I could adjust my work hours for a while, just to see if that helped. I wouldn't have to cut back entirely, but I could shift my start and end times so I could handle the drop-offs and pickups if needed. I didn't want to jump at the offer right away because I felt like doing that would let my wife off the hook. But after thinking about it for a day or two, I decided to take him up on it, at least temporarily. I wanted to see if me handling the pickups and drop-offs would alleviate some of the stress, not just for me, but for my wife too. Maybe if she didn't have to worry about the timing of daycare, she could focus more on the other things she needed to get done. So I sat down with my wife again and told her about the offer from my boss. I framed it in a way that wouldn't make her feel attacked, saying that I understood how hard things had been for her and that maybe I could help out more by adjusting my work schedule. To my surprise, she didn't get defensive. She seemed relieved, almost like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She agreed that maybe this would help, and for the first time in a while, it felt like we were on the same page. Since I started handling the daycare runs, things have been smoother. Our son is happy because he's not the last kid to get picked up anymore, and I feel less stressed knowing that I'm in control of the situation. But I can't help feeling like this is just a band-aid. My wife's lateness wasn't just about daycare. It's been a problem for years, and I'm starting to wonder if it's tied to something deeper. I'm still considering therapy, both for us as a couple and for her individually, but I haven't brought it up again yet. I don't want to push too hard too fast. For now, we're in a better place, but I know this isn't the end of the story. Update 2. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me through all of this. I'm back with another update, and I've got to admit things have gotten a lot more complicated since my last post. If you remember, I started taking over the drop-offs and pickups for daycare after my boss allowed me to adjust my work hours. That helped to ease some of the immediate stress, but like I said before, I felt like it was just a temporary fix, a band-aid over a much larger wound. I was right. For a couple of weeks, things seemed almost peaceful. Our son was happier, there were no more late fees from daycare, and my wife seemed more relaxed now that the pressure was off her. I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of some positive change. But deep down, I knew that avoiding the root cause of our issues wasn't going to solve anything long-term. It didn't take long for new problems to crop up. My wife's chronic lateness started affecting other areas of our life again. She'd still be late to family gatherings, doctor's appointments, and even our son's playdates. It wasn't just the daycare thing. It was like she had no sense of urgency about anything. I'd find myself waiting for her to get ready for hours when we had plans. Sometimes we'd miss things altogether because she just wouldn't be ready in time. It was incredibly frustrating, but I kept quiet, trying to avoid more arguments. Then something unexpected happened. A few weeks ago, our son had a pediatrician appointment. I had a meeting at work that I couldn't miss, so I asked my wife to take him on her own. The appointment was at 11 a.m., but at 10:45 she was still at home, getting dressed. I had to leave for work, so I texted her a reminder about the appointment and hoped she'd get there in time. When I checked my phone during my lunch break, I saw a message from her, sent around noon. She'd missed the appointment completely. At that point, I couldn't hold back anymore. When I got home that evening, I sat her down and asked her what was going on. I was as calm as I could be, but I was also firm. I told her that this wasn't just about being late anymore. This was about our son missing important appointments and about us constantly being disorganized. I asked her if she realized how much this was affecting not only me, but our family. I even brought up the idea of therapy again, suggesting that maybe we both needed help figuring out why this had become such a pattern. Her reaction caught me off guard. She broke down in tears, real, heavy sobs, and told me she didn't know why she couldn't seem to manage her time. She admitted that she felt overwhelmed, like she was constantly playing catch-up with life. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged that there was a problem beyond just losing track of time. She said that she had always been this way, even as a kid, and that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to change it. She told me that she was scared that I was going to leave her because of it. Hearing her say that hit me hard. I've never once considered leaving her, but I could see how she might have thought that, given how much tension this issue had caused between us. I reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere, but that we needed to work on this together. I couldn't keep carrying the entire load, and she needed to take some steps to address the problem. I brought up therapy again, and this time, she agreed to at least try it. We started looking into therapists, and after a couple of days of searching, we found one who specializes in time management and relationship issues. My wife set up an appointment for herself first, which was a huge step for her. She's never been one to ask for help, so I knew this wasn't easy. I also decided to look into couples therapy for us, because I felt like there was more going on in our relationship than just the lateness. Around this time, something else happened that added another layer of complexity to the situation. One evening, my wife went out with a couple of her friends. They went to dinner, and I stayed home with our son. It was supposed to be a casual night out, nothing major, and she told me she'd be back by 9 p.m. Well, 9 came and went, and she still wasn't home. By 10:30, I started getting worried. I texted her, asking where she was, and she replied that they'd decided to get drinks and that she'd be home soon. It wasn't a big deal that she was out late, but when she finally got home, something felt off. She was acting strange, kind of distant. I asked her if she was okay, and she brushed it off, saying she was just tired. But over the next few days, her mood changed. She became more withdrawn, spending less time with me and our son. She started staying up late, scrolling through her phone, and she seemed distracted whenever we talked. At first, I thought it was just the stress of everything catching up with her, but then I noticed something odd. She started getting texts late at night, and when I'd ask who it was, she'd quickly say, "Oh, just one of the girls," and change the subject. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I did something I'm not proud of. I looked at her phone. I know. It was a breach of trust, and I regret it, but I was feeling desperate to understand what was going on. What I found wasn't exactly what I expected. She had been texting one of her friends, venting about how she felt like she was failing as a mom and as a wife. She talked about how guilty she felt for always being late, for missing appointments, and for letting me down. She also mentioned that she'd been feeling depressed and anxious for a long time, but that she didn't know how to tell me because she didn't want to burden me with her problems. It was heartbreaking to read. I felt guilty for snooping, but more than that, I felt terrible for not seeing how much she was struggling. The next morning, I came clean. I told her that I had looked at her phone, and I apologized for invading her privacy. She was upset at first, understandably, but when I explained that I did it because I was worried about her, she softened. I told her that I had read her messages about feeling like a failure, and that I wished she had told me sooner. She admitted that she had been scared to open up because she thought I'd see her differently or think less of her. That conversation was a turning point for us. For the first time in a long time, we were really talking, not just arguing or making excuses. We were being honest with each other about how we were feeling. I told her how much the lateness and the stress had been affecting me, and she told me how overwhelmed and anxious she had been feeling for years. It was like we had been living parallel lives, each of us struggling in our own way, but never really understanding the other person's perspective. We agreed to move forward with therapy, both individual and couples. She's already had a couple of sessions with her therapist, and I can tell that it's helping. She's starting to recognize that her time management issues might be related to deeper emotional struggles, and she's beginning to work on strategies to improve. We've also started couples therapy, and while it's still early days, I feel like we're finally making progress. The lateness isn't fixed yet. I don't think it'll ever be something that's completely solved, but for the first time, I feel like we're both committed to working on it together. She started setting alarms and reminders on her phone, and while it's a small step, it's a sign that she's trying. I'm doing my best to be patient and supportive, even when I'm frustrated. It's been a long road, and I know we still have a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a while, I feel hopeful. I love my wife, and I believe we can get through this. We're not perfect, but we're trying, and that's what matters. Thanks to everyone who's been following along and offering advice. Your support has meant more than you know. I'll keep you updated as things progress, but for now, we're taking it one day at a time. Update 3. Hey everyone, back again with the final update for now. I've been sitting with everything that's happened over the past few months, trying to process how much has changed since I first posted. I want to thank everyone for the kind words and encouragement. It really helped during some tough times. So, to pick up where I left off, we were both in therapy, working on things individually and as a couple. At first, I wasn't sure how much progress we'd actually make. I was hopeful, but there was still a small part of me that wondered if this was just another temporary fix, like when I started handling daycare drop-offs and pickups. It felt good at first, but I worried that we'd eventually fall back into the same patterns. One of the things that came up in couples therapy early on was how much our roles had shifted over the years. My wife had been a stay-at-home mom ever since our son was born, and while I'd always supported that decision, I hadn't realized how isolated she felt. She told me that she'd started to feel like she wasn't contributing to the family in the way she wanted to, that she wasn't pulling her weight. That hit me hard, because I'd never thought of her role as less than mine. I thought we were equals, but she didn't feel that way. It became clear that part of the reason for her chronic lateness was that she was overwhelmed. It wasn't just about poor time management. There was a deeper sense of helplessness underneath it all. She felt like she had lost control of her life, and the lateness was a manifestation of that. She told me in therapy that every time she was late, she felt like a failure, and that made it even harder to try and change. It was a vicious cycle, and she didn't know how to break out of it. Around this time, I made a decision that was both difficult and necessary. I told my wife that we needed to reassess our roles and responsibilities in the household. It wasn't just about her being late anymore. It was about both of us finding a balance that worked. I suggested that we consider putting our son in daycare full-time or even hiring a part-time nanny to help out. At first, she was resistant. She felt like hiring help was an admission that she couldn't handle being a stay-at-home mom. But after some reflection and more therapy, she started to see that it wasn't a failure on her part. It was just a different way of managing our family's needs. We ended up finding a great daycare that offered full-time care, and we also hired a nanny to help in the afternoons. This was a game changer for both of us. With the pressure of managing all the day-to-day tasks lifted, my wife had more time to focus on herself and her mental health. She also started picking up a part-time remote job, which helped her feel like she was contributing financially to the family again. The shift in her attitude was noticeable almost immediately. She seemed lighter, less burdened by the stress that had been weighing her down for years. I've learned a lot about myself through this process too. I realized that I had been putting too much pressure on my wife to handle everything at home. I thought I was being supportive, but I hadn't really been listening to her needs. Therapy helped me see that my expectations were part of the problem. I wasn't asking her what she needed. I was just assuming she could take care of everything because that's the role we had fallen into. I've been working on being more communicative and asking her how I can help, instead of just assuming she's got it under control. Things aren't perfect, far from it. My wife still struggles with time management, but it's improving. She's more aware of it now, and she's actively working on strategies to be better. She sets reminders on her phone for everything, and we've started using a shared calendar to keep track of appointments and schedules. It's not a magic fix, but it's helping. And the biggest change is that she's no longer making excuses when she's late. She acknowledges it, apologizes, and tries to do better next time. One of the most surprising things that came out of therapy was a conversation about why being late had become such a consistent issue for her. During one session, my wife opened up about her childhood in a way she never had before. She grew up in a household where being late was normal. Her parents were constantly late to everything: school, work, family events. It wasn't seen as a big deal, and that mentality had stuck with her. In her mind, being late wasn't necessarily a bad thing, it was just how she'd been raised. But as she became an adult and started her own family, that attitude clashed with the responsibilities of parenthood. Therapy helped her realize that she'd been carrying this behavior from her childhood into our marriage without even thinking about it. This realization was huge for both of us. It gave us insight into why this had been such a persistent issue, and it helped me to stop taking it personally. I'd been thinking of her lateness as a lack of respect for my time and our son's needs, but really it was something much deeper. That's not to say it's an excuse for the behavior, but it helped me see that this wasn't just her being careless. She's working to unlearn something that's been ingrained in her for decades, and that's not going to happen overnight. As for our son, He's thriving in his new daycare. The change in him has been amazing to watch. He's more confident, more social, and he's making friends. He used to get anxious about being the last one picked up, but now he looks forward to daycare every day. I feel a huge sense of relief knowing that he's in a stable, structured environment where he feels secure. I also feel better knowing that we're not constantly paying late fees, which was a huge financial strain on us. One of the biggest takeaways from all of this is that no problem exists in isolation. I used to think my wife's lateness was just about her being disorganized or disrespectful of time, but it was so much more than that. It was tied to her mental health, her childhood, and our family dynamic. We're still working through all of these layers, but we're doing it together now, which is a huge shift from where we were when I first posted. I know some people might wonder why I didn't just walk away or give up. Trust me, there were times when I felt like I was at my wit's end. But I love my wife, and I believe in our family. We've been together for 10 years, and while this issue has been a major challenge, it's not the whole story of our relationship. We've had so many good times, and I know that underneath the stress and frustration, we're still the same people who fell in love all those years ago. If there's one piece of advice I can offer to anyone reading this, it's to communicate. I spent so much time bottling up my frustration, thinking that if I just handled things myself, everything would be fine. But that only led to more resentment. It wasn't until I started really talking to my wife, and more importantly, listening to her, that we started making progress. Therapy has been a huge part of that, but even without therapy, just sitting down and having honest conversations can make a world of difference. So that's where we are now. Things aren't perfect, but they're better. We're both committed to working on ourselves and our relationship, and for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I'll keep you all posted if anything major happens, but for now, we're taking things one day at a time and doing our best to move forward. Thanks again to everyone who's been following this journey with us. Your advice, support, and even the tough love really helped me see things from different perspectives. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm grateful for where we are now.